beekeepers. I run Anarchy Apiaries. Anarchy does not make rules for other beekeepers. We can all still be friends. If you're trying to build up huge hives and ship them to California to go to almonds, yeah, those guys mostly need to treat. They need to feed. They're on this chemical wagon, and they're the first guys to admit that they don't like what they do. Nobody wants to put chemicals in a beehive. If they were to stop, if they were to miss time to feed and time to medicate, they'd probably not have any bees left the next time around. Well, how did it all get started, you know? This wasn't me. This was one of my favorite bee customers, actually. But the way that I got into bees was actually because of this drawing right here. It really has nothing to do with bees. I don't even know what's going on. I'm still trying to figure this out. It's like, looks like some kind of mouse, some sort of pipe structure. Well, I was in college. I was an art major. I didn't actually win 6 hives in a poker game. I had friends who knew beekeepers in Vermont, had 1,000 hives, that I could park my van out back of the honey house and just camp out, and it just fascinated me that I could do this, and kind of sent me down this rabbit hole about the natural world and the farming life and where our agriculture, how it works, and what people do in order to make food. And that got me into the permaculture books. Permaculture is now this like global movement, permanent agriculture, about ecosystem design, about how systems on the farm all work in conjunction with each other. I picked up one of these permaculture books, the Permaculture Designer's Manual by Bill Mollison and Dave Holmgren in Australia. It had all these funny drawings on every page, and I came to this drawing of this mouse, and I'm like, what is this? So I read the description, and it turns out in the bush country of Australia, humans were building structures out of PVC pipe and putting them out in the fields. And field mice were going into these structures and storing their wild grains and wild rices. And humans would go in and harvest from the field mice. And they said as long as they left about 20% in there, the mice just kept packing more in. And this just totally shattered the screen I was using to look at the world. It's a totally different perspective. And suddenly your pests are now your allies. Who thinks of this stuff? It made me realize that we could take a fresh lens to look at everything that we do. And I wanted to apply that to agriculture, and beekeeping just kind of came my way. I had an opportunity to go to work, get stung for a living, which is exactly what I did. But it was really this drawing that set me down this path of wanting to be a farmer in some regards. Why do we need different perspectives in our agriculture? Well, honestly, things are not going that well for us beekeepers. This was a mudslide in California. They couldn't get the forklift off the truck to unload the bees. The weather is just keeping all these beekeepers on their toes. This was in Texas, normally a dry holding yard, 400 some colonies, and one of these historic floods that are now happening more and more often. So even when your bees are happy and healthy, you can see them trying to bubble out and save themselves. So things are just getting harder for like so many different reasons. So I don't call it, I don't call it colony collapse disorder. I call it beekeeper collapse disorder. That's really what's going on. I think our honeybees are going to be just fine. It's us beekeepers that really seem to be in trouble these days. And not just from varroa mites. This one we're all familiar with on the left. This is the Tropicalelops mite. This is getting a lot of grant money. A lot of researchers get free vacations to Thailand and Korea to research this new Asian mite. You know, varroa jumped from Apis cerana to Apis mellifera, spread around the world about 100 years ago. This little one has jumped from Apis dorsata to our Apis mellifera, and it's working its way here. It'll probably show up in Florida first, like everything else does. They say it's going to be like varroa on steroids, the next big thing. Who knows what's going to happen? So, you know, we don't know what's coming down the line. But so I signed up for a 1,000 hive operation in Vermont. I knew nothing about bees. And walking into my first bee yard, I was 21 years old. I didn't know what I was doing, and I guess I didn't smell right, or I wasn't moving right, because even before I got the veil on, the bees just attacked me. I was stomping around too hard, I don't know. But they got stuck in my hair, they started stinging my neck and my face, and I screamed. I ran, I freaked out. I ran a couple 100 yards away. The bees calmed down, they stopped chasing me, and I sat down, I started picking stingers out of my neck, and I looked up at this beautiful blue sky and this green field on this Vermont spring day, and I waited to see if I was gonna die. And I didn't die. Somehow I finished out that first day of work. For some reason I came back the next day, and at that point I was totally hooked on beekeeping. I realized it was the hardest thing I had ever done in my life. And for that reason I wanted to stick with it. And that was 22 years ago. I've been into a beehive just about every single day since then. So I got it like honey in my blood, you know? And I don't start with this story to intimidate you all who don't have bees yet or are newbies. I don't want you to be scared of your bees. These days, getting stung is my favorite part of beekeeping. Yeah, believe it or not. Yeah. We say getting stung makes the honey taste more sweet, you know? Well, there's known physical medicinal benefits from having venom in your blood. It increases your white blood cell count. It reverses, it's clinically proven, it reverses arthritis, multiple sclerosis, increases the cortisone levels in your joints. It's just incredible medicine from getting bee venom, and beekeepers know this. But what I like even more is the psychological benefits. Every time I open up a beehive, I need to be present. I need to be awake. I need to be aware. I need to be in that moment. I need to shut down the whole rest of the world, and I have to slow down. Everyone my whole life had been telling me to speed up, and now bees were telling me to slow down. It was great. So every time, even still to this day, every time I open a beehive, it's a meditation. It's a Zen practice. Otherwise, I know I'm gonna get stung. You have to play by the bees' rules. So the psychological benefits of being in that moment, totally turned on every time you are with your bees, is one of the greatest gifts I think bees give us, you know? And eventually you learn how to move in like fluid, deliberate acts and be like, have these Zen motions around your bees. They're very good teachers at that. Well, the boss told me that his bees were struggling, had 1,000 hives. In 2003, it was a struggle to get them through winter and keep them healthy. I pulled up the first frame in this hive, and he said that the bees were sick and not doing well. I pulled up this frame, and it was completely made out of plastic. It just didn't seem to make any sense to me. You tell me that the bees are stressed and not doing well, they have parasites, diseases, and here they are living on a plastic skeleton. It seems that, putting chemicals in this hive is like a Band-Aid. You're just trying to treat these symptoms of these mites. Maybe there's a deeper cause underneath these symptoms. The mite maybe not the cause, it's a symptom. So maybe the bees are just stressed out, and they've been around for 60, 70 million years. They probably have the ability to solve problems, even like Varroa mites, if you give them a chance. Give them a good fighting chance. But I was brand new, I wasn't there to judge or anything. I understand why people use plastic and high-speed extractors. They stand up a lot better to bear attacks, I know that. But that fall, it seemed that all my friends were moving to Brooklyn in New York City. I, on a whim, moved out to Montana. And I got a job with a beekeeper out of the phone book my first day out there, and I signed up for a 5,000 hive operation. 4 hives on a pallet, we put 400 hives on a semi-truck, we ship them down to Central California to rent them out to almond growers. Almonds are 100% dependent on bee pollination. So they were there for a couple weeks, then we scooped them up, we brought them up to Washington State to pollinate apples. And then we brought them back to Montana, we pollinated cherries, and then melons and squash. They made a little bit of honey, and mostly we were just revamping these bees to do this pollination gauntlet for the next year again and again. It was awesome. Everything ran like clockwork. These were the hardest working, most innovative people I had ever met. But then, still, it was like chemical warfare. But these guys worked so hard to do what they had to do to keep their bees alive. These bees were going from monoculture to monoculture. That was malnourishing them. They weren't getting diverse nutrition. They were exposed to a lot of chemicals on these farms. So they're being malnourished and poisoned. You add the stress of being on the road, it's really no secret why their bees are dying. Still to this day, we had catastrophic losses for these guys just this past winter. doing this route, but it's the hard work of these beekeepers, splitting, getting their numbers back up, doing this migratory pollination. Their hard work is what is enabling our food supply in this country. You know, the U.S. is already a net food importer. We barely even feed ourselves these days, but the migratory pollinators are enabling this system that is just killing their livestock, and it's broken. And so it used to be a lot easier for them. It's just getting harder and harder every year. Varroa has been in here over 30 years in this country. It's now worse than ever. The viruses are getting worse because beekeepers are just trying to keep their bees alive to, make their payroll, feed their families, and support their growers. They're doing all that they can. And the chemicals work for a couple years and then they don't. Well, I was out there in Montana for a year doing this migratory pollination, totally fascinated. I got really good at driving forklifts with like 4 or 8 hives loaded on them. It's a whole it's a weird world out there. I got a call from my first boss in Vermont. He told me his bees were crashing. He was down to 500 hives with a normal 1,000 that he wintered in Vermont. And so what he did is gather them all up by hand. He didn't have a forklift, and he shipped them on a big semi-truck down to South Carolina to hopefully give them a milder winter and earlier spring to save his bees, save his business. And he was tied up in the marketing end of things of his honey products, so he couldn't find anyone to go to South Carolina and manage these hives. He called me up and begged me to go in the spring and just do whatever I could. And me being totally naive, I said, sure. There's no guarantees in the bee world. I'll do the best I can. He drew me a map, got me a bus ticket out to South Carolina, and in spring of 2005, I started going through the hives that he had brought down in the swamps. And I had to call him right away and tell him another half of the bees had died. He barely had 200 hives alive of his normal 1,000, and the ground was literally crawling with bees. They had shriveled wings. They had deformed wing virus, a virus vectored by Varroa mites. The brood looked terrible. The bees were dying every day, and he had a white strip in every single hive. That white strip was called checkmite. Checkmite is coumaphos. Coumaphos is an organophosphate. It's a neurotoxin. It's extremely nasty stuff. I pulled up one of these checkmite strips out of the hive, and there were Varroa mites crawling up and down on the strip that was meant to kill them. The treatment had lost its efficacy. Checkmite replaced Apistan. Apistan was the first chemical treatment in the 90s when the mites came. The late 80s, early 90s, beekeepers suddenly became pesticide applicators. Before that, everyone was organic. We were against chemical agriculture, any spraying, any chemical. We were all we had organic practices, Beekeepers started having to use chemicals to fight the mite, and it didn't go well. Apistan worked for a couple of years, it stopped working. They replaced it with coumaphos, checkmite, really nasty stuff. And now I literally watched this treatment fail. I looked around, I was 24 years old at the time. I was responsible for millions of little lives, and I really had no idea what I was doing. I explained all this to the boss, and he said, well, you can just start making splits. Make splits with eggs. We didn't have any queen bees ordered or anything like that to speed up the process. He's just take a strong hive, split it in 2. Take a hive, cut it in 2, put the top box onto a new bottom board as if they had swarmed. We're simulating a swarm here. So whatever side was queenless would build a queen in her absence as if they had swarmed. Well, we didn't have any hives that were strong enough to do that too. They weren't at that swarming level. The mites had torn them up so bad that I wanted to speed up the process and do the best job I could, so I did some reading. I hooked up with a couple local beekeepers, and I taught myself how to graft. Grafting is the process of taking a little tiny tool, picking up a larva, a little baby bee larvae, and putting it into a cup and dropping that into a very strong queenless hive. That queenless hive then becomes what we call a cell raiser. It'll raise those into queen cells. So you take that strong hive, you can do that walk-away split. Split it in half, you'll raise 1 new queen in the queenless side. Or I can take that same strong hive, I can remove the queen, put her in a cage like this one, and I'll take away all their eggs and all their larvae, so they have no ability to raise their own queen. and I'll leave them in that queenless, hopelessly queenless state for a couple hours, stressing them out. This is totally invasive, manipulative beekeeping here. But it is means to an end, because instead of raising just one queen in that queenless hive, I can now put in graft. I can put 50 of these little tiny cups that I graft a larva into, and I can start 50 queen cells and use those to start 50 new hives with the same amount of resources. These days, people use the Chinese push-button grafting tool. It's kind of like a soft tongue, it's spring-loaded, it's very simple. I didn't have one of those fancy grafting tools that cost all like $2.99 at any bee supply place, but I had a paper clip. And I hammered down the tip of this paper clip into a little tiny spoon, and that's what I used to teach myself how to graft bee larvae. And I do not recommend the paperclip at all. It's like a torture device for bees. I was doing everything wrong. I was like rolling the larva out of the cell that was just mashing them up. They're very fragile. I was using sunlight to light the larva to see what I was doing. The UV was just frying them. I did everything wrong. Really, it did not go well for my first 7 or 8 tries. Nothing worked. But then suddenly, the tupelo trees bloomed in the swamps of eastern South Carolina. And that honey flow was so intense and so forgiving for me trying to learn how to graft, it actually started to work. You know, some of the queen cells started to grow, and then 10 days after graft, I would put them into a little queenless split I made. The virgin queen emerges from that queen cell. About a week later, she goes on a mating flight, and she starts to lay eggs, and they're off and running. It speeds the process up rather than just letting them raise their own. So I just started grafting every day, making splits every day when the queen cells were ripe and ready to put in. I started running out of frames. Then I ran out of boxes. I started staying up all night, building frames, putting in foundation, and building boxes just to use them all up the next day. And I did it day after day, keep grafting and grafting. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. All I did was work bees, move splits, and build bee equipment. Until the boss called me and asked, like, how is it going? I hadn't talked to a human in weeks. It was deep cover, full immersion. And so I looked at the list. I looked at the amount of splits I had made. I counted up all the numbers. I looked, it was the start of May, and I realized the operation was back up to 1,000 hives. We went from 200 to 1,000 in about 2 months. So grafting is not someone that every beekeeper has to learn, but in this case, it allowed for rapid regeneration. If you ever want to not have to buy bees or things like that, you can grow your own, and grafting is really the fastest way to do that. And these days I still graft a little bit, but I also let them raise their own, and there's walkaway splits. We'll get into a little bit of everything here shortly. But I was amazed. It made me a believer of how many bees I had made so quickly. The boss said, good job. He sent down some helpers. We picked up all these splits, and we shipped them up to Vermont. And it was the start of May. The dandelions had just started to bloom. We put them right on the dandelion honey flow. And 2005 ended up being a bumper honey year. Some of those queens that I had raised early on in South Carolina went on to lead hives that made over 300 pounds of honey. Like one hive. I was amazed. And I realized that it was all these genetics. And the boss said I had done such a good job. And since I was making much less than minimum wage anyway, he said, take 10 hives. Take 10 of whatever you want. These will be your bees. Find yourself a bee yard. And this is your bonus for doing this rescue mission. So I picked 10 hives out of all the 1,000 that didn't have the shriveled winged bees. They didn't have the spotty brood. They were handling the varroa mites as best as they could. And they became the genetic base of what I'm still working with today. And that spring of 2005 was the last time I ever treated them for anything. I always intended to treat them and do integrated pest management and treat the ones with the most mites and breed from the ones with the least mites, but I was so busy making queens and making more bees, I never got around to it. So I haven't treated now in, going on since 2005, a while. I'd say 18 years, no treatment. So it was pretty cool that I could have my own bees and I was off and running. So I decided at that point to come on down here to Florida, get some more experience. I was still broke at that point, and I ended up living here on right across from the Babcock Ranch and working for a beekeeper with 15,000 hives. And I got a whole new education about hive beetles, about 4 different species of ants that will wipe out a beehive. I think those little fire ants might be the worst of the really tiny invasive fire ants, but you got bigger fire ants, you got bull ants, you got Caribbean crazy ants, Argentinian ants. It's an ant smorgasbord out there. It's amazing. And they'll all attack bees. Everything wants to eat bees. It's incredible. So it's a whole different kind of beekeeping down here. But there's also constant pollen coming in all the time, constant nectar year round. And so it's no wonder why so many beekeepers come down here for the winter. And what you can do down here, if you can keep your pests and problems down, it's absolutely amazing. This is like paradise. So I came down here, and while I was working for these really large-scale guys, I was building up my own numbers. I had gone out west to do pollination. I ended up with about 10 hives down here in Florida, and I made those 10 into 150. Again, in a period of about 2 months, again, using that grafting. And I was so proud of these 150. They were little tiny 3-frame Langstroth hives. And I decided I wanted to move back to New York. Suddenly, colony collapse disorder hits the media. Everyone starts bugging out, like literally. I figured it was time for me. I had all the support, people wanting to help my new bee business. It's time for me to see what I could do, raising queens for Varroa resistance, but also like hardiness for winter in the north, more honey, good temperament. Everything depends on the genetics of those queens. So I made some calls in New York. Suddenly I had 15 bee yards. A lot of people just didn't even want any rent honey. They just wanted to help. And I took my 150 nukes, I put them again right on the dandelion honey flow. I was calling them survivor stock at this time. By then, they had all beautiful brand new wags. They were just super healthy. I watched as they started to bubble out the sides of the box, and they started to run out of room, and then they started to swarm, and I looked around, and I didn't have another frame or another box or anything to put these growing bees into. And I'm still broke, believe it or not, keeping bees for a living. So it was really at that time that I stumbled on the real mission of Anarchy Apiaries. It's to bring the means of production back to the beekeeper, to make it a lot simpler, a lot more affordable, not so complicated, you know, that more people can keep bees without going into debt. Because I wasn't going to buy 150 Langstroth setups and spend $30,000. Like, it just wasn't my style, you know? So I did some reading, and I quickly came up with some alternatives. I'm going to show the alternatives now in a magic trick. I will make a beehive appear out of thin air. Okay, it's basically thin air. These are baby blue ones. I have baby pink ones as well. There you go. There's your beehive. This is a Kenyan top bar hive, like so. You can keep one of these like behind the seat of your truck, because you know you all keep bees in Florida. The hardest thing, the most difficult thing of beekeeping down here is having enough boxes. You can either buy expensive Langstroth stuff or figure out how to make hives for pennies. So the Peace Corps in countries like Ethiopia and Kenya, where they couldn't get precision milled lumber, started making these long trough hives and called them top bars, because the bars literally make the top of the hive. These bars sit next to each other, and I started giving them a little comb guide, because the challenges of these hives is keeping the comb straight bar to bar. But what I would do is cut a little groove here, and I would glue in 4 popsicle sticks, like that. So I was off and running with a hive that I could build for pennies. I started making lots and lots of these things. The next year, I had to cut 5,000 of these top bars. I had to eat 20,000 popsicles just to support my beekeeping habit. You know, the things that you do for your bees. You know, believe me or not, it looks a lot better with bees in it. But so I was off and running. I didn't care about honey. Honey would come later. I just wanted to get in there, look at the brood, and so rate the health of the hive and keep raising queens. These are some of the first queen cells I talked about grafting in South Carolina.
I'm not able to advance the slides for me.
Oh, okay, but no problem. It's like it depends on how quickly I talk or not. But So I was never going to treat, and like I said, I meant to treat, but I never got around to it because I was just so busy making more bees. It was always like numbers, 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 getting more bees. So I always had more bees than I knew what to do with because I knew how to make queens quickly. But I do like this phrase, treatment-free but not stupid, you know, because there's lots of different ways to do it. And honestly, if you're going to buy commercial bees or get them from a commercial source, they come with mites. Every hive, almost in the entire world now, has mites. So are they kind of mites that are gearing towards symbiosis, like a benign coexistence with the honeybees, which is where we will eventually get. The mites aren't going to be a problem. Or are they super mites? If you treat them, you're going to kill probably 90%, 95%. It's that last 5% are going to be more violent, more aggressive. They're going to reproduce faster. And after 30 years of treating for mites in this country, we haven't gotten rid of the mites. We've just made them worse. We've made them more aggressive. The diseases that they vector are now a lot worse. So they're super mites. And unfortunately, if you buy bees these days, you're getting super mites with them. So if you don't treat them, you know, or have some sort of plan to cope with that, chances are that the hive is going to perish to those mites and the diseases. So we call it treatment-free but not stupid, so know what you're getting into. When you buy someone else's bees, you're buying someone else's problems, basically. But that's okay. We're all doing the best that we can coping with this. But the way that I cope with it, I look at these 3 different levels: environment, methodology, and genetics. And I think that's the importance, the order of importance there. I think environment is most important. I think you can take just about any kind of bees and do just about anything to them. If you put them in a really, really good spot, the bees will tend to survive. Think of humans. When their bellies are full, they don't tend to get sick. They have a more robust immune system. Bees are the same way. Bees are what they eat. They need good, clean forage that is abundant. This is what we have in South Florida. Lots of really good forage. All your Spanish needle, every single palm tree that you see. There's just so much blooming down here for bees. For me, you know, when I started my business, you know, I did everything backwards. I was going chemical free. I was doing alternative hive designs with really no mentorship. And I was starting a business with like no interest in making money whatsoever, being a total like anarchist. So, but despite all of that, keeping bees in South Florida allowed me to pull it off. You know, I was able to always have plenty of bees just because the environment down here is so forgiving. I mean, it's hard to kill bees down here in Florida. We still find ways, but it's such an awesome place to keep bees in Florida. So if anywhere you're going to try to not use chemicals on your hive, South Florida is one of the best places. If you're going to go up to Canada or Alaska or something like that, you know, that's really, really tough country. it requires a much like tighter game, you know. But you know, Hawaii is also really good. If you all are thinking about moving. Areas of like Southern California, areas of Texas, the whole Gulf Coast is actually really good for bees and really forgiving. So, but again, it's warmer. They don't go through the stress of winter. Bees are tropical creatures from the beginning, so it's just like it's neat. You all like are in a good spot, right here. So I'll get a little bit into each of these things, but to really. So I started doing a lot of these top bars, and I needed some genetics. So I called this guy when I moved back up to New York with my 150 nukes and started converting them to top bars. And this is Kirk Webster. He is a treatment-free beekeeper in Vermont. He doesn't migrate. He lives up a mountain like a hermit. And he uses Russian bees that love Vermont winter. And they've never been treated in that area of Russia. The USDA went and got some of those genetics, brought them here to look at mite resistance. And people like Kirk started using them to not wean their bees off of treatments. And so he bred them in isolation, like literally up a mountain in Vermont with no other drones but what he brought up there to control the genetics. Kirk is not a top bar beekeeper. He only keeps Langstroth hives. This is him working one of my top bar hives, and he would never be caught working a top bar hive. This is like a blackmail photo of Kirk. But when I moved back up that way, I called Kirk and I told him I needed some genetics. And he let me come pick out 4 queens from his isolated mating yard. And I started 4 different families. And I tracked all these genetics from that, all with grafting from these breeder queens that Kirk gave to me. So I gave him a shout, and he was also literally the only person who told me I could do it, that I could keep bees alive without using chemicals. Even my friends told me my bees were going to be dead in 2 years, and that was 18 years ago. Ever since then, I'm like raising my own queens. I've had more bees than I know what to do with. So, but Kirk was really supportive back in the day, so I always give him a real shout. You can read about his beekeeping at kirkwebster.com, and he has a whole breeding schematic. He's like really about breeding bees, and I'm like, well, Kirk, you just moved to Florida. You can keep any kind of bees, and they'll tend to do well. You don't have to like breed 14 different bloodlines and cross them in isolation and things like that. But he's working on it, you know. So I started shaking packages out of it. I made a simple package funnel out of cardboard and duct tape. It really kind of matched the aesthetics of the rest of the operation. So I started selling these shook swarms like there, and like I would do it the way the bees wanted to do it, because they would be gearing up to swarm, and I would just aid the decision that they were already making. You know, this hive wants to swarm, so I will just make the swarm for them. I'll put the queen in a cage, and I'll just shake 2 or 3 pounds of bees out of that hive and just let them keep finishing their swarm cells as if they had swarmed. They're like, wow, this is like natural beekeeping. I don't know if like natural beekeeping really exists as kind of a paradox to me. There's nothing like natural about beekeeping, but this is like biological beekeeping. I guess natural beekeeping would just be keeping bees in like a hollow oak tree or something, never messing with them. And I have too many commercial roots to really be that hands off. But this is like biological beekeeping. I'm working with their biological cycle. But at the same time, I was still grafting queen cups. I would into my top bars, you know, I would put a log on that, and they would draw those into queen cells like that. So I was also a commercial queen producer. So am I an industrial queen producer, or am I a natural, nature-based beekeeper? Where do I fit in? How big do I want to get? Well, this isn't me. This is the Kona queen operation. I went to visit Hawaii around this time. I visited Kona queens. At that time, they were the largest queen producers in the world, producing around 300,000 queens a year. They can do it year-round in Hawaii, like similar to Florida. We can do it year-round here. We always have drones. But these are just some of their cell raisers that they were grafting into. And they had this ridiculously intricate system. So they had a double hive, a double queen hive, each of these. So there's a queen on this side, these nukes, and there's a queen on this side, and there's a queen excluder here. That queen excluder, so one queen can't get up through the excluder and kill the other queen. So, but the bees can mingle and mix above that queen excluder without the queens killing each other, and a single box goes on top of that queen excluder. They had a pipe going down each one of these rows. That pipe hooked up to a giant mechanical bellows that blew smoke down the length of that pipe, and the offshoots underneath each one of these hives. That smoke would drive the young bees upward through the queen excluder. And as soon as they had enough bees bubbling out of that top box, they would slide in a piece of sheet metal and make that top box queenless. Let it sit queenless for a couple hours, and then they put their graft in. About 5 days later, those queen cells were capped. They were moved to an incubator for another 4 to 5 days until they were really ripe and ready. And then that process was done again and again and again. And this is how you raise 300,000 queens in a year. I mean, it was like way more intricate and a larger scale than I was ever going to be, but I was really impressed by just the creativity that beekeepers have in their businesses. I wanted to keep it simple, actually. I wanted to be even simpler than my top bar hives, because I was doing a lot of time on the table saw, building these boxes, and I was building them really cheap. Every time I went to the sawmill, I would bring them jars of honey. They gave me twice what I paid for, and using all this like rough cut or discarded lumber, pallet wood. I mean, really, if you show me a dumpster, I can build you a couple beehives out of the contents, for sure. But, so one day, I was walking down the aisle in Publix, and it really was Publix that inspired this whole mess. And I found this. This is the forefront of beekeeping technology. It is a barbecue skewer. It's the jumbo bamboo skewer you can still buy at Publix. And buy the bags of 50. I took one look at this bag of barbecue skewers, and instantly I thought, having a bee brain, I thought, I can put bees on that. And so that's exactly what I did. This isn't me, this is my evil twin who wears a tie. So I started shaking bees onto these bamboo skewers, and they started making their combs off them pretty perfectly. And it was a eureka moment, because now I could build this whole box without using a table saw, or any power tools at all, just a hand saw. 4 pieces of wood, like that. And the only important dimension is really this inside is 11 by 11. You get your 12-inch barbecue skewer, and it sits right on top of that 11 by 11-inch box. These days I make them about 8 inches tall, and that's the least side attachments, easy to get in and out with a, I don't even use hive tool anymore. I use a dinner knife. Every year I get the bee supply catalogs. I leaf through every page and I say, I don't need that, I don't need that, I don't need that. We buy honey jars, we buy queen cages. That's about it, you know? And so beekeeping doesn't have to be complicated. You know, and I don't like to knock Langstroth hives, you know. It makes sense to get a lot of honey, spin it in an extractor, use the wax year after year. But, you know, I've been doing Langstroth for years and years on a really intricate, sophisticated level, like migrating across the country. But the first year that I started doing, you know, top bars and these box hives, I learned so much about honeybee biology. Just learning what they did when put into an empty space, how bees act and what their preferences are, I became a much better beekeeper because of it. So I'm not trying to convert you all to keeping bees backwards, but you know, for the cost of nothing, or just finding some scrap wood around, you can build one of these boxes. And of course, a lot of us keep bees just for the connection to nature, the connection to our ecosystem around us. If you build your own bee hotel, if you build your own house for your bees, you're deepening your connection. You say, like, oh, they really like the house that I built for them. Not that some guy in the 1850s designed for them, you know. So that'll deepen your connection. And also, if you ship bees into a box like this or this, you're going to understand how bees act out in nature. Those of you who do bee removals, you know what I'm talking about. That has always been my best teacher. I've done hundreds of bee removals, and just seeing what they do when going into an empty space, you really learn a lot about what bees want and stuff. So if you build a couple of these, you know, and here in Florida, you know, the bees will just come. They'll just show up and occupy this space. You'll learn a lot more than just keeping Langstroth hives. So just have a couple just to juxtapose, deepen your understanding of what's going on. So that's my little plug of why you should build some of these alternative hives, alternative options. So I started making lots and lots of these things. This was down in Homestead. I used to have a lot of bee yards, over 30 yards just in Miami-Dade County. These organic avocado grows, beautiful mango grows down there. They've all been turned into condominiums. I've lost one after another over the years, especially in the last couple of years, getting the boots, you know. My biggest problem in my beekeeping is humans. We have to stop human progress at all costs in order to protect our green spaces for our bees. But, you know, I understand. It's not my land. You know, I'm a farmer without my own land. So when they say the bees gotta go, they gotta go. So each one of these is sitting on a milk crate. I like a tile, 12 by 12 inch tile bottom, and an 18 by 18 inch tile goes on top. It doesn't blow away, it'll last forever. It's awesome, it's pennies, you know? And I stack them one on top of the other, actually. So I actually was putting a divider in some of these boxes. So put 2 nukes in one box, and then another box on top with another 2 nukes. So this is an aerial view. You see the tiles, every tile has 4 nukes underneath it. This was a spot in West Miami, and there was over 400 nukes in this yard, and I see I have like little circles here. Each circle was dedicated to a different family line, a different breeder queen. This is a total rabbit hole. You can spend all your mental energy, like thinking of these intricate systems of like, and then once you get into breeding and tracking the families and crossing families, it really doesn't stop. But the idea of critical mass, you know? So if you have like a couple bad apples in this bunch, you know, a couple that were sick, had diseases, or a couple that had too many mites, they will spread from hive to hive and like that to that. So even though I don't treat, so I'm not going to medicate or use chemicals, I've never seen the point, because I just have too many bees already, I do realize that mite drift, mite bombs, it is a real phenomenon that happens. And diseases, you have a disease that's riding a mite, that is riding a bee, and that bee can just go from host to host. And there's really no vertical transmission. I mean, eventually, hosts and parasites balance themselves out. The parasite does not want to kill its host. You know, eventually they become, you know, in balance with each other. The problem is, beekeeping, on a commercial standpoint, they just keep carting in more hosts. They just keep making more and more bees and using what treatments work as they can. So when a virus can go from host to host, unchecked, without the worst of them dying off, the most violent ones aren't allowed to die off. They just jump to the next host by a bee, a virus riding a mite that's riding a bee from host to host. That's horizontal transmission, and that's why the viruses are getting worse. And that's why we have super mites these days. So I can bring this up because I treat this yard, you know, we think of a beehive as like a super organism. You know, the individual organism is just one single bee, but no bee is an island. The bee can't survive on its own, but so we call that whole hive a superorganism. But a situation like this, I see this whole bee yard as a superorganism. Because all these bees are basically one unit. They all live in the same area. They are just drifting from one to the other at all times. So I try to keep them all healthy. And I do that not only from the genetics that I'm tracking, but by brood breaks. So think of a hive that's going into its second year, or here in Florida, even its first year. It lands somewhere, builds up. What does the hive want to do? It wants to swarm, right? Think of what happens when a hive swarms. The old queen leaves with about half the bees. You have about 3 weeks in the original colony with no eggs being laid. They build a new queen in her absence. She has to go on a mating flight, come back. Really, 3 weeks go by the time she starts laying eggs, and there's no brood, no capped brood left in that hive. Now, where are all the varroa mites in the hive? They're usually in the brood. 60–70% of the varroa is under the capped brood. Bees have a biting behavior. They have a chewing behavior, grooming behavior. They will groom and bite the mites off of each other, if they can. So when a mite emerges on an adult bee, the first thing that mite wants to do is jump into some open brood and hide. They actually even have a snorkel on the top of their head that they can breathe, and as they burrow and hide in the royal jelly, they breathe through a snorkel like that. Otherwise, the bees are going to bite them off of each other, and they do. So when a hive is broodless, when a hive swarms, the old queen leaves, the hive is broodless by the time the new queen starts laying eggs. So all the mites are now phoretic. They're all now running around trying to hide from the bees, and they're getting groomed off like that. It's almost like the bees know what they're doing. It makes like total sense that the bees have all the tools that they need to combat varroa mites. Now, if you let your hive swarm from a commercial standpoint, that's like half your money flying out into the woods. And if you do it in urban Fort Myers or anything, chances are those bees are going to go into someone's wall and get met by a spray can, and that's not good either. But what we can do as beekeepers, going in there and checking things out, is that we can simulate swarms. And that's what I do in my business by raising queens. Every 3 weeks, I go into one of my little hives, and I'll remove the queen. I'll put her in a tiny little cage like that, and I'll either replace her with a queen cell that I grafted, or I'll just let them raise their own. And my business has really been like selling queens. I'm not certified in Florida. Right now I'm certified in North Carolina and certified in New Jersey. But I mean, I've had 9 bee inspectors in the last 11 years over on the east side of Florida. I think we're pretty stable right now. I might come out of retirement here shortly. But so my business is raising several thousand. I think 2020 was our bumper year. We did about 5,000 queens. And it was just me and Sarah. You know, Sarah's the only one who kept showing up to work. So selling like a couple thousand of bees a year was really just a byproduct, because I need to break the brood cycle in order to keep my bees healthy. If they don't have magic genetics or in a magic place with no other bees around infecting them with varroa, I do these brood breaks. You can either let them swarm, and the bees have done the work for you, or I will simulate the swarms following bee biology. You can call it a treatment if you want, inducing brood breaks, but really we are just following bee biology, and if I didn't do anything, they would swarm and do the job for me. So I'm going to pass around the queen, and you're new, right?
I am.
No, there you go. There's your first queen bee. So she's in there. She has about 6 attendants. Those are her daughters in there, keeping her warm, keeping her groomed and fed. So if she doesn't make it back to the front, I'll check Angela's pocket.
You probably should. You probably should.
Sam, how does that affect honey production and stuff?
Honey is not my... Well, we make a lot of honey. The bees make in spite of us. Honey was never my goal, because honey, oh my gosh, you make a lot of honey. It's like punishment for doing a good job. It is sticky. It is messy. Selling it is just like hustling. I love making it. I love making all this stuff. I hate selling it. You know, it just puts a value on it. It's just not my thing, but I know it's a big value, and I trade honey for everything, you know? I trade bees for everything, too. So I was always interested in making bees. Like, honestly, these days I have a beekeeper mechanic, I have a beekeeper dentist, I have a beekeeper accountant, and they all work for bees. You know? And whoever doesn't want the bees, I give them money. You know? But, so I make several thousand pounds of honey a year. I just basically harvest it until I'm sick of it. Or like I have stores, I sell at some markets and things like that, holiday markets, but it was never my primary thing. But with the 1,000+ hives that I have, the honey is just like made as a byproduct. Sometimes we have to remove the honey just in order to like make the nukes more workable, get it out of the way while we catch queens. I got you. So they make honey in spite of us, but and we do sell it. We make like nice comb honey. I am like proud of the products that I make. But it was never like I don't like do a pounds per hive average or anything like that. It's basically I don't harvest from every hive every year. Basically, we're just making lots and lots of bees. And I tell people, oh, at the peak of the season, I'll have 2,000 hives. And they're like, oh, you must make so much honey. It's like, no, I have 2,000 hives, but they're all only this big, you know? But they do make honey in spite of us.
Similar to honey, but it's money, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, queens are going for $30 to $40 this year, and
Rather than double draw honey.
oh yeah. Well, honey has its perks also. It's never going to go bad. It's not like selling like bok choy or something. You got to do this stuff. So, yeah, but the candles I really like because we mash and strain all our honey. We don't spin it or anything. So we have lots and lots of wax. And we make lip balms and all those candles. I make, you know, I have a house in North Carolina with a candle room. And I think the wax is actually keeping the house standing. It's a real mess. Well, anyway, I started taking the brood that from these mating nukes, because it was so clean from these brood breaks that I was using, I put them into my cell raisers, because I wanted those healthy bees to raise the next generation of queens. And after a couple weeks of like putting this emerging brood into these cell raisers, this is what they look like. So if you're going to be grafting, and you're going to be putting 30 or 40 of these little tiny queen cups, and raise 30 or 40 or 50 queens in one box, you really want more young bees than will fit in the box, like that. So every week I would put more emerging brood into another graft, and each one of these was dedicated to a different family line, and like I said, it's as much thinking as you want to put into it.
And that's a good thing, right? To see all those bees.
Yep.
Because everybody here keeps thinking they need to do something.
Oh, they're going to swarm or something. They're not going to swarm because well, in this case, they're cell raisers.
They're too hot.
Yeah. In this case, those are all young bees. That's the middle of the day. They're not foraging because they're all young. And I want as many young bees as I can fit in there because I want all those young bees to be feeding the graft. This is my buddy Aaron doing some grafting with that little push-button grafting tool. And so I got it all dialed in that I knew what I was doing every single day of the year. You know, I believe it or not, I need structure in my life. So every Monday we would boost those cell raisers and graft. Every Tuesday and Wednesday we would catch queens and we would bank brood. By banking brood, I say we put it above a queen excluder for next week's cell raisers. We want that brood above an excluder because the bees will cap all the open brood by the following week. Why do we want capped brood? Well, that capped brood the following week, I know this is the terminology will drive you insane in this, but bear with me for a little bit. The following week, we take that capped brood, we put it into the cell raisers. Those cell raisers are queenless. If there was any open larvae or eggs on that brood, they would make a rogue queen cell. If I don't see that rogue queen cell, you know what will happen? That virgin queen will emerge and she will go destroy the entire graft of what I have put in there. It's never happened to me before. I always find every single rogue queen cell. No, I'm just kidding. It happens all the time. This is why queens are so expensive. You know, anything you imagine can go wrong. We have usurpation swarms taking over cell raisers. It's just like queens showing up out of like thin air like, while we're working them. You know, protect the cells. You know, but so. Every Monday we boost the cell raisers and graft. Every Tuesday and Wednesday we are catching queens, we're banking brood. Then every Thursday the queen cells go in. Not from that Monday, the previous Monday, but from 2 previous Mondays, the prior week. So those cells are 10 days old when we put them in. They're going to emerge in another day or 2. So all of our mating newts are queenless for 1 to 2 days before we put the queen cells in. That gets better acceptance. For mated queens and queen cells, it just really helps. And it runs like clockwork. We are out there, rain or shine, making room for these queen cells. We're out there with like beach umbrellas sometimes, you know? Because you gotta stay on schedule, you know, sign your life away if this is what you wanted to do. But I loved it. You know, I've been working on these systems and theories for years, and I thought that this is the way to do it. You know, it's a self-contained system, brood going from the mating newts to the cell raisers, the cells go back to the mating newts, tracking families. And so, since I knew what I was doing every single day of the year, I started inviting friends out to see my system. Hey, guys, spend a week out here, see the catching, see the brood banking, and how we do our cell raisers. And so my buddy Aaron from Jennings Apiaries in Louisiana came out. He had about 100 hives of his own, had grafted, done some queen rearing. He wanted to raise his own local queens back home and take it up a notch, up to like a business and work on his own local stock. So he came out and studied for a whole week. He loved it. He had a great time. And at the end of this week-long process, we had finally put all the queen cells in, and he looked at me and he said, "This is way too much work. I'm just going to buy queens from you." Oh, man. It's not what I'm trying to do. I thought this was the simplest it could possibly be. It's like, and it got to me, and I started thinking, it's like, yeah, this is way too much work. Like some people like want to sleep and take lunch breaks and things like that. Not bees all the time. So how do we make it even simpler? There's ways to make it simpler, I'm sure. So, well, some people just sell queen cells. You know, I used to sell queen cells. I do here and then, but mostly I use them all because I have this whole armada of like really small hives ready for the queen cells. But often you can just buy queen cells just like this. These aren't mine. These are Michael Palmer's. He's a buddy of mine in Vermont, and he's just has like raised the standard of excellence of how good queens can be. So not only does he have his methods down and how he makes these beautiful, each one of these will probably be a beautiful queen, but his queens have to go 40 below zero in Vermont, and they have to make over 200 pounds of honey. In his operation of like 1,500 hives, if a hive is not making 200 pounds of honey, because he's a honey producer, that's how he makes his living, he sells queens on the side. If a hive is not making 200 pounds of honey, he will go in there and he will pinch the queen. He'll squish her to death. It sounds cruel and terrible, right? But, I mean, he's running a business, you know? And he will replace his worst genetics with his best. And so he has, like, raised the standard of excellence like that, you know? It's, again, like this Langstroth ideology, you know? That Langstroth box is so expensive with the supers and everything and the frames inside. And then the woodenware starts wearing out. You have to maintain that woodenware. Because there's attrition, it's atrophying all the time. Basically, the bees in that unit have to pay rent in order to earn their keep. You got to replace the frames, you got to replace the boxes, and they're expensive. So those bees, you have to get something from them. Whereas if your box is just pennies or free, I mean, what's it matter? I'll let my queens live to be 4 or 5 years old. I mean, I'm not going to pinch her to put in a more productive queen to get more money from that unit. I don't care. I'll just put them in the corner of the bee yard, let them live as long as they want. It's a whole different kind of thinking when you don't care about the value of your woodenware like that. But Palmer is an awesome, awesome beekeeper, and I go visit him in Vermont like every summer. And even though he's like, he uses chemicals and stuff, I think he's an excellent teacher, and we all have a lot to learn from him. And he's in his mid-70s now, and he has a lot of experience, and he raises really good bees like that. So, but he also sells queen cells, sells queens, makes honey. This would have been an excellent queen. You see, she's got purple eyes. She would have emerged in another day or two. They start to get their color, and then their wings develop last. So this would have been a good queen if I hadn't opened up the queen cell. But this is always the first step of quality control. You know, I raise lots and lots of queen cells, so the runts of the litter, the smallest ones, never make it to the mating nukes. We cull them out, and you know, rather than like tossing them into the trash, I actually make them all into chocolate chip cookies. These are queen pupae chocolate chips. I can get you the recipe if you want. Actually, I only did this once for this one photo, but just to freak people out. But
We have some back there in the back.
yeah, queen pupae. Well, if you come on and visit, we'll have some queen pupae cookies. Why not? You know. But ideally, we raise lots and lots of queens like that. Thousands a year, most years. These days, I'm doing like more honey and stuff like that. More experiments and more like grant-funded research and things like that. Not so much production. I mean, I'd rather teach you all how to make a queen than sell you queens. But I can do that too. You know, I've just like always done things a little bit differently, and I've always tried to pursue my ideas because I've always had extra bees to have fun with. You know, every week I can kind of tweak the system or try something new. So I've always thought that bees do a pretty darn good job raising queens, just all by their lonesome. And they are here now, you know, bees on a stick, you know, making 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 queens right here. And ideally, the best one will win. And so I really thought that, like, well, you know, are these queens as good or better than grafted queens? You know, everyone says, like, oh, when you graft, you can control the size of the larva. You can get the most ovarials in your queen. She'll live longer if you can graft the smallest larva. I'm like, well, what about when bees make the choice? You know, bees' choice queens, these emergency queens. Well, we pitched a grant idea, and we got funding for this from SARE, that's the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education grant, and they funded us to make over 500 splits and just let the bees raise their own queen. Ideally, like to show, it's like, oh, can backyard beekeepers who don't want to graft, can they raise quality queens? And so we tried to test a whole bunch of variables, and really just the variables are out of control. Science and beekeeping, trying to do the scientific method there, isolate single variables, oh my gosh, it's very hard. But we looked at a couple things that seem to have significant differences. We looked at different populations, different densities, how crammed the bees were in the box, different methods of like moving the split to a new yard, moving it in the same yard, or just dequeening the hive in its place. One of the most significant bits of data we saw was the age of the comb. The hives that had newer comb did significantly better raising a queen and having her come back from a mating flight. And so that's one of the objective data points we got. How many nukes were successful at raising a queen and have her come back and start laying eggs? And you can research all this and see the write-up online through projects at SARE, just like Google walk-away split. We did that in 2021. So the mating percentage was one of the best data points like that. And also, we sent a bunch of the queens to the North Carolina State University Bee Lab. It's Dr. David Tarpey's lab. And he has what he calls it the queen clinic, we call it the queen machine. These are some of the queen cells that these queens emerge from. And again, ideally, the best one emerges first, destroys all the other ones, and becomes the one queen in the hive. So we submitted, and hopefully they're all very good. But we submitted a bunch of these like walk-away split queens or emergency queens or bee's choice queens to David Tarpe's lab, and we got a report. Anyone in the country can send in queens, and they will measure and weigh each body part. Then they'll dissect the queen and extract the spermatheca. They'll tell you how many sperm are in the spermatheca, and then stain it, put it on a slide, and tell you what percentage of those sperm are actually viable in that queen. And the problem is, you don't get the queen back. Which is a bummer, because some of these are really, really good. But again, this is like some of our most objective data that we have. And then he gives the queen a grade, you know, A, C minus, something like that. And the cool thing is you can assess them against all the other queens that the lab has ever gotten in their like 8 or 9 year history. They've had thousands of queens. And generally, all the queens that have been sent from all these big-time queen producers, they've all been grafted queens. And all these queen producers are sending some of their best queens because they want to get an A. You can call your queen producer and say, hey, what are your Tarpe lab results? It's like, oh, we only got a C. It's like, I'm going to go with the other guy. So these are some of the best queens in the country that these emergency non-grafted queens were up against. And so they scored very, very well in comparison. So it just shows objectively that maybe bees do know best. That you, in your backyard, can raise a queen that's as good or better than anything grafted or anything you can buy. And hopefully, in this area, they'll be gentle. And I can talk about that whole rabbit hole at length. That's a whole other meeting. But, yep.
Yeah, you're using super seedure cells that you sent off to that place. And
Yep.
This one has swarm cells on it. Which do you prefer?
Those are actually emergency cells. They were just, when you're not using foundation, the bees almost always make them on the edge. So if you're using a frame or using plastic, they'll make them wherever they can.
So we've been mistaking a lot of them for swarm cells because we're doing foundationless. Okay.
So they'll make them wherever they have room to make a nice big cell, and they like to make them on the edge because they can widen that cell cup, you know, for the queen cell. And that's something I think that's in the old comb. They can't widen the base for that larva. The larva spins and spins around, eating. It's eating like 50 times its body weight in a minute or something. So they like the newer comb, and they like the edge where they can make a nice big bowl that the larva spins and eats, and spins and eats. That's all it does. So it seems like on the edges or on the newer comb, they'll make it just about anywhere. But when you're using foundationless frames, you'll find that the cells, even the emergency cells. So these were emergency, these weren't swarms. But, oh, there she is. Today is her birthday. And she's now caught in the act of slaughtering her sisters. I think she emerged from this one. It's open. She's already destroyed that one, destroyed that one, destroyed that one. I think she's going for that one. It's high drama in a beehive, but that's the way they do it every year. You know, so this is a little summation, talking again about environment, methodology, genetics. These are some of my favorite researchers in each of these cases. I should mention Tom Seeley, because he's just like my favorite bee geek. He's just like loves bees. His books don't tell you how to make the most money or sell the most honey or things like that. But he just is just fascinated by the organism, and he's found a lot about their swarming behavior, their cavity preferences, and anything he's ever written is just invaluable to us. We're just really just fascinated by the biology. The methodology, again, I talked about brood breaks, and that's how I really keep my bees healthy. Yes, my genetics are important, and I do track families and stuff. I put them in the best areas I can, but also I am simulating their swarming, or letting them swarm, because I have a lot of hives in my outyards I don't get to in time, and to me it's just like they've done the work for me. But Ralph Buechler at the German Beekeeping Institute has measured a lot of the brood breaks, or how to induce a brood break by caging the queen or letting the hive swarm, and correlating the varroa mite population with those brood breaks in order to not use chemicals. And then you've got genetics. You got people like Kirk Webster, who I showed you using Russian bees, Randy Oliver's in California with his Golden West queens. He has a Mite Zero program, and he's been able to get about half of his operation to be treatment-free at this point. And he's got thousands of hives and a lot of help and a lot of research. backing for that. So he's a guy that's walking the walk also, moving towards treatment-free. John Kiefoos in France, he coined the bond method, the live and let die approach. John Harbaugh, he's the guy who discovered the varroa-sensitive hygiene trait, BSH. Those are bees that have a very acute sense of smell. They can smell when a piece of brood, when a pupa is infested by a mite. They can smell it through the wax, and then they have an uncapping behavior. They will uncap it, and they'll actually remove it. They'll cannibalize it, and that disrupts the varroa mite in there. They only do it to the cells that have varroa mites, all through sense of smell and that removal behavior. They call that varroa-sensitive hygiene, BSH, and you can buy BSH queens, and I've used some of those genetics. So John Harbaugh and Jeff Harris discovered that at the USDA bee lab in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And it's a highly inheritable trait also, varroa-sensitive hygiene. It lasts a couple generations, and then you start to lose it, and then you lose this one, again, it's only one mechanism, and really they're breeding bees that cannibalize their own young, but it is an inheritable trait that bees use, and it does knock down varroa. Purdue University has the Purdue ankle biter bees, the mite biters, breeding them to groom and bite the mites off of each other. They're seeing how many damaged mites are on the bottom board. That is not as inheritable trait. You don't see a lot of the mite biter bees for sale, but it is like another mechanism that they are still breeding for at Purdue University. So lots of cool different mechanisms and traits in the genetics, but there is no magic bee. We haven't had this golden magic bee that does it all, Environment and methodology, brood breaks, just put them in a really good spot. That's like the best that we can do for them. So I'll show you a couple more of my fun tricks and things that Angela, we were talking about. It's like, oh, you can just put jars on top. Yeah, I try to do a couple of these every year and try to not have the hive swarm. Or I put them on hives that already did swarm, because then they won't swarm. When they do swarm, or you remove the queen, they'll backfill the brood nest. Where the brood was, they'll put all this nectar, and as soon as their new queen comes back from the mating flight and starts laying eggs, they evacuate all that nectar out of the brood nest, and they'll put it in any corner or nook and cranny just to get it out of the way for the new queen to start laying eggs. And they'll just throw it up into these jars through that shiny bubble wrap, and I didn't put wax or anything in there. They just, in this case, it worked. The honey has to be there, and you have to have lots of bees, but the hive, in a hive that doesn't swarm, though. But it is really fun when it works. So, this is my 7-foot solar wax melter. I've actually built several of these over, this one lasted about a decade and finally just rotted away. I recycled all the parts. This is a sliding glass door, like that, on hinges. So you drop up the sliding glass door, just some roofing tin, lined with that shiny bubble wrap. Once again, I use that stuff for everything. And I tried all kinds of inventions, steam, carpet steamers, steam generators, boiling, different filters and stuff. Solar is the best. And we're in Florida, so it makes the most sense to process your wax this way. The UV also breaks down any chemicals, pesticides that the bees are bringing into the wax. So it's really cool. We get a lot of wax because, again, my extractor isn't some giant centrifuge. It is a bucket and a stick. Like that. Actually, I have like a cement grinder on my drill. And I could just grind it up and then just strain it. You mash and strain this honey. So I'm after all this wax, for sure. And I use every last drop I get to make into products. There's Sarah. She's in the back, too. So we've been doing this together for, I think, going on 8 years now. But, all these products are byproducts for me. I just like hanging out with bees every day, but people want the bees, so we do raise queens and teach classes on how to do it. But then I get all this really awesome stuff. We make all kinds of candles. We make these luminaries. If you have any amount of beeswax, these are so fun to make. You dip water balloons in the wax. It only takes about 6 or 7 dips because you have cold water in the balloon. And so the wax hardens really quickly. And these luminaries, they don't melt. Just keep putting a tea light in there. You keep dropping more tea lights in there. But we make propolis, tincture, we make lip balms, we track varietal honeys, and I'm proud of this stuff because I never put a chemical in hive. I'm not on my own time, and I never had to go into debt in my beekeeping operation like most people I know when we're running Langstroth stuff. But I pity them, I try to keep my back in good shape running these little tiny hives. But, And I really love these bees because I think that they are like hollow trees. You know, they do swarm if I don't get to them. They go out to the woods, sometimes they come back, and there's a real relationship with the whole community, the ecosystem of what these bees are and fitting in to their own specific sites. You know, I try not to move them. I do them as little as possible because I want them like in their spot, doing their thing. And, you know, we are moving towards like a nature-based beekeeping or natural beekeeping because, you know, I'll make splits like all day long, split, split, split. But then if we don't get to them and they swarm, they like really like cleaned up their parasites because they know what they're doing. And I have faith in them. And, you know, there's always plenty of bees no matter what happens. So, you know, in summation, you know, we all got to put up bait hives. It's just like, it's like, it should be a requirement. New beekeepers, old beekeepers, it doesn't matter. Even if you don't want to have bees, you don't want to have any more bees, please put up a bait hive, because if you catch a swarm in that, you have probably saved that swarm from going into somebody's wall and getting sprayed. You know, you can always bring it to the club or give it away. Someone will do it. If it turns mean, you can requeen it. You know, there's ways to deal with it, but like really, like putting up these bait hives, and oh my gosh, it's like ridiculous how many swarms you can catch down here. Bees are free. I don't want to sell you bees because I'll just take 5 minutes, tell you how to build a swarm trap, and you get your own bees for free. Yeah, in the back.
Yes, hi. How do you set up a big hive?
Okay.
What do you put in them?
Well, I mean, here in Florida, it can just be like a trash can. It can be an emergency cone, a barbecue, a water meter, an upside-down bucket, a flower pot, you know?
Yeah, I'm asking you because one of my dogs swarmed, but swarmed to the neighbor who wanted to have bees.
Okay.
And they swarmed to an electric box.
Yeah.
And I put a nook there with some old frames hung on and wax and everything. But they seem to come in and out and
Catch the queen.
yeah, catch the queen from
If you can scoot her on up into that box, I mean, they already got their own thing going on. You know, if you put like a comb of brood, if you can actually like put some open brood, if you put the box right on top of the electric box, can they actually access? If there's actually an entrance, they can move.
Well, not really, because it would need to be upside down.
Yep, you're gonna have to open them up. Drill a hole in the top, but don't hit any wires.
Put it in the box that you're going to catch on.
If they can access it, you're gonna have to flip it upside down and probably cut out the brood, because they're probably established at this point. But if you can move it or flip it upside down and then put a box where it was, you can rubber band the brood into frames like that, and you're doing a removal at that point. And I've done hundreds of removals. They're always difficult. There are no easy ones. It's always traumatic. But people make big bucks for this full time.
Because you know what they say. They've been there 10 years, and they say.
Oh, 10 years.
Oh, no.
Oh.
The people.
Okay.
But they say that every year there's a swarm find the box, and they leave when they get big enough.
Okay.
They just swarm from the box.
They run out of room and don't requeen, maybe. Maybe the comb in there is too old for them to raise a good queen cell, or it gets too hot if it's in the sun. But it sounds like they have a perfect bait hive already.
Right.
And putting up a box like this next to that, I mean, they're still going to use the one that's been used before. But if they put up a box like this and put some old comb in it, a little bit of lemongrass oil, a couple drops of lemongrass, or Swarm Commander, or any kind of swarm oil, but lemongrass has citral. Citral is in their Nasinopta, that's their come hither pheromone. So lemongrass has citral in it. So a couple drops of lemongrass, some old comb. If you can use a used box, if you have a used beehive box that already has propolis in it, that's perfect. That'll draw them. You don't even need blowers or anything like that. But they prefer the shade, definitely, but they prefer to be high off the ground, but we catch them on the ground all the time. This is Florida. There's bees everywhere. People have no idea that every third building has a wild hive. They are among us down here. It's awesome. Yeah, bees are free down here. It's like people want to order bees from me all the time, and I just feel unethical selling them a nuke or anything. It's like you can just get free bees. And our urban bees are actually really nice. At least on my side, I've stayed over Broward County and Dade. You know, you can't have a mean hive in like Miami Beach stinging pedestrians. those hives have been located and exterminated over decades now. And that is, as cruel as it sounds, that is genetic selection. So these urban bees that are stinging people, you know, the mean bees have been found and culled from the gene pool. So I've done mating in urban areas, and the people who do removals and things like that catch swarms and stuff. Generally, they're nice. You might get a few feisty ones, maybe, well, in my area, maybe 1 or 2 out of 100. And my advice to you is just have a contingency plan. If your hive turns mean, have a spot you can either move it away from civilization, away from people, or have a plan, or call someone you can call, and you can either, if it becomes a real safety hazard, just have a plan that you can deal with that hive. Or you can split it down, and if you've got like a real strong, big, mean hive, split it into like 3 or 4 or 5. You know, let them raise their queens because they might like calm down that way, or get new queens, new bloodlines on in there. So, I mean, I can talk about like this Africanized bee stigma all the time, and what the state requires you to do. You're not supposed to raise your own queens. You're supposed to re-queen everything with certified stock. But the local bees are the best bees. They really are. They know how to handle hive beetles, handle all the species of ants, handle the heat, handle the humidity. Bees from California don't know how to do that stuff. Bees from Texas, bees from Hawaii, they don't have the skill set that our local bees do. And the best thing that we can do is like take these local bees, handle the mean ones if they do arise. Eventually, if you do this long enough, you'll get 1 or 2 here that is spicy that you don't want in your backyard. Have a plan. Requeen it with one of your nice ones, a swarm cell or a coat brood or something you graft from your nicest hive. And you're doing everyone a really good favor in the whole gene pool. And you might get some hives that are like this. This was in upstate New York, where wild bees are way more rare. And this is like the hive of my dreams. They had been in this building for over 20 years. The owner said that they never died out, and now this barn was getting knocked down, and they wanted the bees saved. This is the old studs. These are 2 feet on center there, and this thing was about 9 feet tall. There was over 200 pounds of honey in this wall. And they were so gentle. I found the queen pretty early on. I put a dot of paint on her back. I marked her, and I started grafting from her. I raised daughters from there. And those daughters bees, they wintered beautifully. They knew when to stop raising brood in the fall, before the real cold temperature set in. They knew when to start raising brood long before the maples and willows started. So they were raising brood in February before they could fly, in anticipation of the maples and willows. They didn't respond to the flow, they anticipated it because it was in their genetic memory. So these are the bees of my dreams. I was humble in front of that hive. But again, like local, these bees know what to do, anticipate your local honey flows, your local problems and stuff. Local seems best, you don't need magic queens. All right, so probably like a bunch of you probably do bee removals. You know, there's a lot of wild bees, and if you're a beekeeper, for any amount of time, it's not going to be long before someone asks you to remove some bees. Hopefully it's just like a trash can or cone or flower pots. Oh gosh, they love flower pots. But hopefully it's not like a soffit or like stucco. I've done some real nightmare ones that take days sometimes. Or you find like a whole nother hive where there's 3 hives actually where you thought there was 1. But they just run up the soffit, up the rafters to the peak of the roof, and you just got to come back tomorrow and try again. But more often than not, I will use a bee vacuum. I've designed a bunch of different vacuums. This is by far my favorite one. It is a dust buster. It is a cordless dust buster right here. I took the front off the dust buster, and I put a 90-degree PVC elbow. I cut a hole in the bottom of the bucket for that PVC elbow. This is where the dust buster attaches to, so you got your suction down here at the bottom of the bucket. At the top of the bucket, I hang a pink strainer bag, a nylon 5-gallon strainer bag. In the lid of the bucket, I cut a hole, and that's where the tube comes in. So the bees go in this tube, come in through the top of the bucket, and they have a real nice soft landing on that strainer bag. So it really doesn't kill bees. You have extra batteries, so you don't run out of power. It's really lightweight. It's easy to carry up a ladder. Most bee removals I've done have been in like abandoned buildings or job sites where they don't have power. So it's been hard to run a bee vacuum. So this is cordless. Really easy to get up a ladder or things like that. You have extra strainer bags for extra bees. I always like to try to find the queen, put her in the box, and then the bees hopefully follow her, but not all the bees have read the same books that I've read. They don't always follow the queen. So more often than not, you're using a bee vacuum to get all the stragglers like that. I won't go to a bee removal job without a bee vacuum. So it's real cheap and easy to make. So if you got out of 10, one with
The point is for the stragglers.
yeah.
You shouldn't be going out there and vacuuming up queens.
If if you can get a smooth tube, that's a good question.
Smooth tube.
If you can get a smooth tube, it's real easy on the bees. And I like vacuum queens in this, and then they've been okay. But ideally, you get the queen and keep her alive. But ideally, you don't use this at all, and they all want to move the box. But if you come to a hive that's mean, maybe you want to go vacuum first, like that. If the hive has been sprayed, often they can be really, really mean. And they don't tell you that they sprayed them until you get there. Open up the wall and they attack you. Like, whoa, what's wrong with this? Oh, by the way, I sprayed them. But thanks.
This should be a rare thing so that you can use it for nests to get to the
Yeah.
bees, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I like to open up the wall, and usually they're just like super gentle. You know, if you're not during robbing season or anything like that, and like I can even like vibrate the walls and cut open with a circular saw, and they're not stinging. They're really gentle. Our local bees are great. You go out into more rural Florida, you'll have like feistier genetics out there where they're not getting like exterminated. But if you're in urban areas, the urban bees are great because the mean ones have been called out. I think they're great. I mean, keep an eye on them. Like if they get a problem, be able to deal with it. It's like the bee laws are there. We have bee inspectors to keep the public safe, and it's for a good reason. You know,
When you cut your cells out and you say we can do our own that way, and you cut those ones off that on the edges, what are you doing with them? Are you putting them in a protector or
generally, I mean, at my scale, I'll just let them fight it out. You know, but I will cut them out and stuff like that. But I'll have a hive that's ready to go, and I'll just like transfer it in the same yard. If I know that this one's queenless, I keep notes on the lid of everyone. This one's queenless.
Are you transferring the whole frame? Were you cutting the comb or cutting the cells?
Usually, it depends on how many cells. If I've got 10 cells on there, yeah, I'll use a couple of them. But if there's only like 3 on there, I might just put them all in there. You know, I don't know their age at that point. They might be fragile. I might damage them. Things like that. I mean, for me, cutting is just work and time, and I can just, you know, in the time it takes me to cut out 2 queen cells, I can be making 8 splits, you know? But, I mean, I have all this equipment. Always I have extra equipment. That's like one of the biggest problems is having enough boxes for all those swarm cells, for all those queen cells, for all those swarms that, you know, I'll show up in the yard sometimes and there's 5 swarms hanging. There's like, oh gosh, but like, the boxes are so cheap that it's like, I got them ready to go. It's like, couldn't do that in Lang's, not on my budget. Alright, more tricks and stuff, so you know, like I said, like it's really important that we have bee inspectors. They do a really good job, and they're there as a resource to help us when we do have problems. When your neighbor calls the cops on you for the bees pooping on their car or something. I've heard it all, you know. And like in this one case, I did look over and it's like, yeah, there's a lot of bee poop on their car, but it's a right to farm state. I mean, we're allowed to keep our bees regardless of how much poop they poop on their porch. But I see the future as all of us small-time beekeepers being able to sustain our own numbers. If we don't have to buy bees from California or like cart them around, like the more like local food that we can eat, the more bees that we can keep from moving interstate, the less diseases there's going to be, the more self-reliant we are, the less problems with parasites our bees are going to have. So this is the future of what beekeeping is going to be, and all of you are part of it. Because every single hive, even if you just have one hive, you're moving towards this benign relationship between bees and mites, where they can cohabitate. Whereas treating them and stuff like that is all means to an end. If you're trying to make a living at this, I totally understand. But you're not part of what the future's going to be when mites aren't a problem. And it will eventually happen. We'll have like plenty of other problems at that point anyway. The problems are numerous. So, you know, so I'm bringing it full circle. Back to this first image that I showed, the idea of these mice out in the field, and the humans are harvesting the wild grains from these field mice, and this like, oddball relationship that like just blew my mind, and it made me like so interested in systems and the way that we perceive the world you know, I've always been thinking, it's like, oh, this has nothing to do with beekeeping, though. It's just something that I like to share. Until one day I realized it does have one tie into beekeeping. These are selections from my localized mouse collection. This is honeybee taxidermy at its best. We get this up in New York in winter when mice go looking for a warm home. Down here in Florida we get lizards, an occasional snake, and stuff. But I find them eerily beautiful. But that is the one tie-in, you know. So I appreciate you all being here tonight, and if anything, I hope you realize tonight that you don't have to follow other people's rules. You know, this is your reality. Get yourself some experience, and you'll figure out what you need to do to make it work. And the next time you go into your beehive, or look at a bee magazine, or just do anything interesting, bring along a young person. Because the most important thing that we're doing is not getting rich, selling queens, or making an empire of honey. It's really getting these young people off of their cell phones and showing them something in the natural world that can compare and be just as interesting. And so that's the way that we're going to really turn everything around here. So I appreciate you all, and I can sing another song and then take some questions if you want. Or we'll do one more. All I have is heavy metal left. I can do a song about the horrors of the beekeeping world, a song about zombies. Lately in my talks of giving the little comfort hive away to the youngest person in the room. So I think you qualify. Do you want your own beehive? This one? You don't have to have zombies. You can have regular honeybees, and they'll make honey for you.
Oh, she said she'll trade you for that.
Really? That's a good deal. That's a really good deal. Cool. This hive is for you.
Oh.
Sometimes the youngest person is like 50. Here, I'll take the bottom of my stuff. Thanks for coming. Nice. This is awesome.
There you go. That's cool. Very cool. Nice.
So we have stuff for sale. I think we still have a few.